Watch the ride.
Hey everybody, this is another one of my riding tip videos. I've done quite a few. I've got a playlist called Tips for New Riders, but this is not really aimed at new riders. This is aimed specifically at people who came from a 125 and are going up to a 600 inline-four. The reason why I'm going to do a video on this is it's going to kind of cross over onto the whole like 125 onto a big bike difference. Whether you be A2 or direct access, it's not going to be hugely different apart from the power. That's a big ass fly. But what I'm making this video for is to try and also teach you how to ride an inline-four, because an inline-four engine is so different to riding like a V-twin or a parallel twin, is what you end up tending to do your test on. Because they ride a lot more like a 125, you know, their power's low down, they're grunty, they're not really high revving. So riding one of those compared to a 125, the style of shifting everything is very similar. But with an inline-four, it revs so much higher that you tend to, well, basically it causes you to short shift and not actually use the power of the engine, because whereas, as I say, the V-twins, the parallels, they've got a good bottom end, mid-range amount of torque. For something like this, you really have to wind it open to get that power. But anyway, the thing we're going to start with is pulling away, because unlike on a 125, which if you started the engine and put it in first and slowly let the clutch out, like this, it would eventually stall. Well, because this is fuel injected and bigger CC, it will actually pull away on its own, as you can see. Now, this is actually also going uphill, so it's struggling a little bit. But the point is, unlike on a 125, as I say, where if you did this you would stall, you actually can pull away on the flat ground without really using any throttle. Now you don't want to do that, because obviously if you get to a slight incline or something stifles the bike for a second, it's going to conk out and you're probably going to drop it. So you just want to use a tiny amount of throttle. But you can see how much of a smoother transition that is. You know, with the 125 you tend to sort of have to bring the revs up and let the clutch out at the same time, so it doesn't, you know, because it hasn't got that much power to get going and then it gets going. This kind of, you can let it go on the clutch with a very slight amount of throttle, just let the clutch out, you know, gently, and be on the throttle and be able to ride without doing anything. And that's true for most larger CC bikes. I'm not sure about the middle grounds, the sort of 300s, I'm not sure if they're like that, but certainly with this bike and a few of the other ones I've ridden, now the benefit to that is when you're doing things like U-turns and slow control stuff, it's much easier because you're not worrying about stalling the bike, because generally you're not going to stall it. So, you know, things like turning the road become an awful lot easier, because instead of balancing the throttle and the clutch like on a 125 single cylinder, or even on my DRZ mode, if it's 440cc single cylinder, that it's so finicky that you can stall it so easily. Most people who try and ride that bike to start with stall it a couple of times before they get going. It's so sensitive. Whereas in this, it's just, you know, this is so smooth. And because of that, you don't have to worry about all this extra power you have when it comes to pulling away, you know, because you might be scared that, well, if I give it too much power, I'm gonna flip the thing. My advice to you is to pulling away, just learn to do it faster, progressively, and eventually you can properly launch the bike off the line. And see how very little throttle's being used, in fact none here, to control the bike. So as I say, low speed stuff's easy. Now I'm gonna wait for a little gap. Now, launching the bike, this is something you learn to do progressively, but basically, after a while, you can go from normal pulling away to being able to actually ship. Someone come in. There was a car coming, but it's now a lot further away than it was. So, learn to do that progressively. The other thing is gear selection. On a 125, you know, you're going to be picking the gear that works, basically. Whatever speed you're going will determine what gear you're in. You don't have much of a choice other than maybe being one gear high when you're cruising around to keep the revs down. But generally, you're going to be in the gear that you need, because the bike needs to be in that gear, if you get my meaning. But on this, I'm going to go as second, although it could do in first. This bike will do 55 at first. I know that because it hits the rev limiter at 55. But I'm in second gear here, doing 30 miles an hour. I could also be in second, or I could be in third, or I could be in fourth. If I really wanted to be, I could be in fifth, you know. and the bike is still happily cruising along. Now, this is where the thing about the Inline-four's power comes in, because it hasn't got much torque down here, down at the bottom end of the range of the revs. So I'm in 5th now doing 30. If I put the throttle on, virtually nothing happens. It really needs to be in its sweet spot, and that's why that's why you hear them screaming, because their sweet spot of the power is much more towards the middle to top end of the power range. It's different on different bikes. If you have a 600 Inline-four which has been tuned to be a sports bike or a super sport, it's going to be different to this. This is a sports tourer. It's an R6 engine from a few years back, but it's been modified. So, they say detuned, but it's not really detuned. They basically just tune it for more torque and less brake horsepower, less top speed, but more usable grunt at the bottom end. And that's the stuff you use anyway, so it's great. And this is where the biggest issue I had came in. Because I came from riding 125s and single cylinders particularly, which you always ended up shifting really early because there was no point going into the top end of the revs. There's nothing there power-wise, it just goes and then falls off. This keeps climbing, so you need to keep those revs higher. Whereas the DRZ maybe revs to what, 9,000, 10,000 RPM at most, maybe not even that. This is revving up to 13,000, although probably more like 12. Some bikes 16,000, 17,000 RPM. Is the R6 17 or 18,000 RPM? Is ridiculous. It sounds like it's braking at the top end. When I rode the 2017 R6, I just screaming, and it's like even that made me feel like I was not using the engine right, because it's like I've got to keep it in this top end, but it sounds horrible. But because of this, what you'll end up doing is short shifting and not actually ever hitting the power point. So I'm just going to show you like pulling away here. Now this is also known as normal riding, but if you're trying to go fast, you're trying to find the peak power of the engine, if you're not aware of this, you're going to end up short shifting a lot. So you'll end up being sort of, that's pretty standard riding, to be honest, but not when you're trying to go fast, and I couldn't get that through my brain. Now, this is not advice for new riders to ride the crap out of their bike and all of that. I've just explained to you how this engine works. You need to learn about these things progressively and only do it at the right time and place. So here you go, here's an example of not doing it right. See, it's still plenty quick, but it is not getting anywhere near the power of what this bike is capable of doing. Now, when you hit this sort of power point on some bikes, they just take off. There's no one coming, so now I'm going to show you what happens when you actually use the engine, how you keep it in that sweet spot. Notice what a different characteristic the bike seems to have like that. It's because I'm holding the power just below that power point and then using it as I'm going through the gears, and that's where you get your speed on an Inline-four. And it's what I love about an Inline-four, because they just scream. And the smaller the engine, the better, because you're not having to be going stupidly quick to get it to do that. You do that in 1,000, first, second, third, you do in 100, easy. So as you can see, the clutch and pulling away is quite different to a 125. Your gear selection, you have much more options, whether you're going to be a bit high because you're riding more relaxed, or keeping it at that just before the power point, so it's always there. As for some other things that are kind of ubiquitous between big bikes, weight distribution. Yeah, the bikes are heavier, but they feel so much more planted and stable because it's got more weight, it's got bigger wheels. The wheels themselves have got more weight behind them. That gives you inertia in the wheels that helps keep the bike up. It's gyroscopic inertia. That's what helps stopping a bike fall over. There's a lot of physics going on. Another thing is smoothness is important. You don't want to be jerky in corners, that's where you're going to start losing grip. It's about progressive increasing of power. So a lot of people worry about going from a 125 to a bigger bike. They're nicer to ride and they're easier to ride. Another nice bonus is, and this does depend on what 125 you had, the brakes. Big bike brakes are a different world to what my 125 brakes were like. My 125 brakes were scary because you didn't stop. These are scary because they've got so much power. There is no ABS on this bike, so it's all about feel. And I mean, I love a bike that's got no ABS, no traction control, nothing interfering. It's me feeling the bike and doing everything. It's the best experience in my opinion. But my final word on this is, if you're thinking about going to get a big bike, do it. It's really good fun. You don't need any more than a 125, but you really do want a bigger bike, and you realise it more when you have one. Sure, I'm not, I love 125s. I always have done. But there's something so nice about the more relaxed, calm and planted style of something that's a little bit bigger. When you get a road like this, oh god, there's nothing better. But the last thing I'm going to leave you with is emphasising restraint and learning progressively and doing it at the right time and place. The way that most learner riders who get onto a big bike crash, from what I can tell, is they go too quickly and end up binning it into a corner because they can't get the bike round the corner fast enough. And no, I didn't just say there that the bike won't go around the corner fast enough. They can't get it to go around the corner fast enough. Most bikes, well, most people, cannot get their machine to corner as fast as it physically can. Very often there's an awful lot of reserve left of what that bike is capable of, and that's the gap between your skill and the bike's abilities. Which is what makes me laugh very often when people have a 600 and say, oh, it's too slow, need to get 1,000. How about just learning to corner faster? Because that's where the speed is made up. Not, well, it depends how many straights are where you're going. You know what I'm saying. If you feel like supporting this channel, there are links in the description, many ways that you can do that. Any help is greatly appreciated. Now I'm going to go and enjoy these roads a bit more. Catch you next time. This channel is made possible by the support of the audience. Please check out the links in the description and all the different ways you can help support the channel. Any help is greatly appreciated.